Hey, Media People podcast listeners. If you enjoy the podcast, then you're going to love our newsletter, appropriately named the Media People Newsletter. Delivered right to your inbox, each edition is a mix of original and curated content designed to feed your curiosity while aiding in personal development. On top of more podcasts, we'll connect you with articles, interviews, and industry events. Subscribe at mediapeople.ca/newsletter or go to mediapeople.beehive.com. That's BEEHIIV. Thanks for listening to the Media People podcast, lively and insightful chats with the people who power the media industry. I'm your host, Victor Genova. For more episodes, you can go to mediapeople.ca or subscribe wherever you get podcasts, including youtube.com/@mediapeoplepodcast. Views expressed by participants are personal. Pary Bell's CV is stacked with leadership roles at some of Canada's biggest media companies, including, but not limited to, the CBC, Rogers Media, and TorStar. He's made a career of leading organizations through digital transformation, but his original life plan didn't involve building teams, managing people, or navigating internal politics. Pary's first love was drawing. Pary studied general arts at Queen's University, but departed after 2 years to pursue a fine arts degree at Carr University of Art and Design. It was difficult making it as an artist, and Pary made the choice to enroll in the Communications and Multimedia program at Centennial College. He aggressively chased an internship opportunity with the CBC, and his digital media career took off from there. His current role? Leading the Podcast Exchange. Pary Bell, CEO of the Podcast Exchange, stops by to chat about growing up on a farm outside of North Bay, Ontario, the impact sport has had on his life and career, his passion for drawing, and leading teams and departments at some of Canada's most prolific media companies.
The Podcast Exchange, or how it's frequently known as as TPX, is what I would call a boutique Canadian advertising company that specializes in podcasting. It helps agencies and brands harness the power of podcasting to connect their brands and their marketing messages with their targeted audience through the wonderful medium of podcasting. I'm sure over the course of this conversation, we'll go deeper into that. But the second part of the question around what does my role as CEO entail? My role as CEO of a small company has been to drive the business forward, to set the strategic plan, but it's also to be doing the day-to-day. It's a small company. It's like a startup where everyone wears multiple hats, and that's been a big lesson. One of the things I mentioned I was thinking about in terms of this question, it sparked a memory for me. And it was several years ago when I was at Rogers. The CEO at the time explained to me at one point in time that he felt that a good CEO, in his British accent, I'm not going to mimic it, but he stated that, Pary, to be a good CEO, you need to be able to soar with the eagles and also scratch with the chickens on the ground. And he told me that, and I haven't really experienced it to the degree that I have now, but I'm putting it into practice on a daily basis.
Pary, thanks for stopping by today. Really looking forward to our chat. Let's go back to the beginning. Even though you're in the big city running a big city media company, you've got a humble origin story, we'll call it. So where are you from?
I love a good backstory question. I grew up on the south side of Lake Nipissing, outside of North Bay, Ontario. A really interesting community, a Franco-Ontarian and English, strong Franco-Ontarian community. But I grew up on a farm. I'm a farm boy. I grew up on the farm, rode the school bus into town, and that's my origin.
And you spent your entire life there. You guys did not move around. You were always a farm boy until you went away for university. And apart from farming, what else kept you busy? Like, what were your interests or hobbies?
It's fascinating raising kids in the city right now. I had no fear of exploring in the wilderness, of setting up little trap lines and following beaver trails that you have no idea where they're going, and just exploring in the woods or going out in a boat and trying to find places to fish and places to explore. It was amazing, and it's what I knew. The concept at that time of of yesterday, my 13-year-old got on the TTC, went down to the Rogers Center with another one of his 13-year-old buddies to go watch the Jays struggle. And to me, that was 2 days ago, but it was fascinating, the courage that I felt that he must have to navigate the city. Conversely, I had that same courage in the wilderness. It's all based on your perspective. But I loved growing up in the country, except for all the hard work that you had to do. But it was my fun was to get outside and just explore.
Does your son look at that in reverse and go, Dad, you're anxious about me getting from home to the Rogers Center on the TTC, but does he look back at what you were doing growing up and going, you got up at the crack of dawn to like maybe milk cows, lay hay out for the horses, like you said, set traps. You had different things you had to worry about. Like, did your parents ever say, watch out for bears?
Yeah, we did. There were bears in our hood. Absolutely. My parents, again, generationally, you were told to get outside and you're not to come back until dinner time. And that was something that was actually, it's what we did. Things are different. I think when you look at anyone, their perspective is always going to be a little romantic. I think my kids look at my upbringing and they look at it a little bit like, wow, it's so great. I'd love to live in the country. But when you're living it, you look at the other options and go, wow, I would be amazing to actually live in the city. You always kind of look at the opposite, and whether you have straight hair, you wish you had curly hair. If you had curly hair, you wish you had straight hair. So I think there's valuable. They're having a great experience in what they do. My parents still live up north, so we do get up into the country a bit, and they enjoy it. But I don't think they would want to give up what they've built.
Why was sports so important to you growing up? Was it just staying active, staying outdoors, or did it indulge maybe a competitive side you had?
Looking back at it, I think I enjoyed individual sports. I ski raced and I did equestrian with having the horses. I rode and competed. I come from my parents are both very competitive. They were they taught me everything, and they taught me by not letting me win. So when my parents played a sport against me, they didn't make it easy, and it was a rite of passage when I finally could beat one of my parents at a sport that I did. But one of the things that really, let's call it, cemented into me was I absolutely love the intricacy and the benefits of teamwork. And my real passion became so strong when I started to really delve into team sports. I like the notion of a bunch of individuals contributing to a greater purpose and how you can actually achieve more together. And good, strong teams, there's nothing like it. So I'm very competitive. I like to win. People often see my nice guy kind of composure, and they misinterpret a serious competitive. I have a competitive drive. I like to win, but I like to win in the right way. And so I feel that sports really brought that out in me. The lessons you learn, the achievements you make, the how to deal with failure, so many things. Sports encapsulated a way to be in a professional and a personal life. It's helped me as a parent. It's helped me as a business leader, and I continue to compete. I'm still active as an athlete. I still compete, so it's part of my life.
When did you discover your love of drawing?
That's a good question. You know what? I didn't really know I had a love of drawing. I just drew, and my dad painted. He would dabble in painting, and he loved to paint wildlife and animals and landscapes, and it just was there. I just did it. And it wasn't until I was in first year university at Queen's, and I had a sketchbook and I drew things. I just drew as my leisure. I like to do it. And I was playing on the varsity volleyball team at Queen's, And my next door neighbor in residence came in to grab me. He was on the rowing team and I was on the volleyball team, and we would go to the gym together. And he burst into my room to get me, and I was drawing, and I quickly closed my sketchbook, and he said, "What are you doing?" And he showed me, or I showed him what I was drawing, and I didn't even know this. He was in fine art, and he said, "Well, why aren't you in the fine arts program here?" And my honest answer was, "Oh my God, there's no possible way. I'm not good enough. I'm not an artist. I have no idea what I'm doing. I just draw." And he took me for a walk. As we walked to the gym, we went to the building's called the Ontario building. I can't even remember what it's called. And we walked through the studios, and I saw the artwork that the 4-year students were doing at Queen's in Fine Art. And I saw some incredible work, but I also saw some work that people were really struggling with and trying. And I really discovered that the process of drawing and the creative process, that artists aren't just born, you actually learn how to do things. And like everything, it takes an incredible amount of work. And so that was the turning point for me, with actually seeing that my passion for drawing and for being creative was actually a possible path forward.
Do you think that shyness that you showed to your roommate over your artwork was probably related back to that art is subjective, whereas as an athlete, you put the puck in the back of the net. It's a goal. Like, it's very definitive as to who wins a game in sport versus in art as to whether or not someone judges something as being good or spectacular and so forth.
I think there's more. I think the measurability of sport with regards to the outcome is definitely maybe a little more binary. But what defines someone who's really good at the sport? Watching Connor McDavid skate and move around. Often he's not scoring; he's setting things up, or he's assisting. And if you only followed it by the goals, you would really underestimate Connor McDavid's contribution. And I think the fallacy in a lot of in sport, in art, in business, is that you're born an artist or you're born an athlete. There's definitely something that helps you have the framework for putting in the hard work and dealing with the failure and continuing to do it. So in sport, it is the training and the continuous work on your game, and improving your areas of weakness, and putting yourself through physical and mental discomfort of coming back from abject failure where you just can't do it, and whether it's quitting or whether it's having a failure. Those who make it further have ways of actually managing that and building their strength and continuing. The same thing goes in art. Most of the time you fail. You try to do something and it doesn't work. I think it was Picasso who once talked about the evolution of his art, was that he would try to do something, and in the failure, he would discover his ways of doing things and finding his voice. And that was where the emergence of a new art movement would come from. So it's the same thing in business. Entrepreneurs, people who start companies who are putting their ideas forward, face tremendous amount of failure. The ones that persist and the ones that succeed are the ones who figure out how to turn those into lessons. And then I've worked in startups now, and I've in small business, but I've also worked at some of Canada's biggest enterprises. And I would say business leaders that succeed go through that same evolution of trying to break through the status quo mindset and build in a growth mindset to push people to continue learning, to make mistakes, to evolve, and to take chances, and they become better at what they do. And so it's all connected.
And your influences line up perfectly with your passions because they're both artists and professional athletes. So tell us why the Crazy Canucks, Tom Thompson, and Wendell Clark and Michael Jordan are people that you idolize or look up to.
Well, that's a back to my exploring days. Tom Thompson, the icon of Canadian art making in his canoe in Algonquin Park and living in the wilderness. I looked up to him as a role model with regards to embracing nature and trying to capture the essence of things. And so, I mean, his end story is not so great with regards to the accident he had, and but in terms of iconic Canadian, absolutely love him. Growing up, the Crazy Canucks, in particular, Steve Podborski was a massive influence of me as a 10 to 15-year-old, as I was trying to compete and seeing how these Canadians, Dave Irwin and Ken Reid and Dave Murray and Steve Podborski on the world stage were taking chances and doing things that no one had ever done, and so proudly Canadian in their bright yellow downhill suits, was absolutely amazing. As I continued to see the world and do things, Michael Jordan and his approach, I'm back to the earlier topic. I love when Michael talks about the work he did on building areas of weakness of his game. The fact that he didn't make his high school team and he didn't quit and he kept going. It's been, lessons from that have been so important to impart on my kids. I've been a coach and lastly, Wendell Clark. Let's say Wendell Clark hails from a small town in Saskatchewan called Kelvington, and my mom comes from Kelvington, and so from a young age, we cheered a little louder for Wendell. And he was the selfless leader who would put himself in peril to try to change the outcome of a game. And he captured everyone's. Wendell's one of the most widely loved captains that the Leafs ever had. So that would explain a bit of my role models and my influences.
No surprise that your first job ever was working on the farm. When did that convert from it was everyday chores for Pary to this is a part-time or a job right now?
Well, that's a good question. I think that it's a nice thing to grow up and learn the principles of hard work, and that you just you contribute and you work on your farm and you work on the neighbor's farm, and what you do is determined by what's needed right now. I think that really established a strong. My work ethic was really established in that front. I became good enough at working on the farm that I think it was more of a risk for my family for me to take a job doing something else, like as a waiter or a college pro painter or something else, that they started seeing that we better pay him because otherwise he'll go and get a job and be paid. So I did get paid to work on the farm. I look at my son right now. My older boy is a lifeguard, and he's making a great hourly wage. When I started, the hourly wage was not very good, but it was nice to get paid for it and then be able to do something with that with regards to, I bought myself a windsurfer. So it was really amazing to be able to buy something that was from my own fruit of my labor, of my work. And then from there, I think that I learned how to put the hard work in early, and tree planting was, when I look back at the work that was influential, tree planting in northern British Columbia was just game changing for me on so many levels.
I had Sue Haas on a previous episode from Enlogic, and she grew up on a hobby farm, and she left the farm to go plant trees in Alberta as well. She said that the attrition rate was very high. People kept leaving and leaving. Did you find that as well when you were there? Like you were probably the last man standing at the end of your tenure there?
Well, I did 7 years of it. So
okay.
There weren't many of us that did it for quite so long. It's it's a backbreaking job. It's repetitive. It's difficult. You do it in the rain. You do it with bugs. You do it in the extreme heat. You get very dirty. It can be really, really challenging. And on top of that, you have a daily camp cost to cover your cost of your food. And there were many people who actually didn't even make daily camp costs of $23 or $25. And that was very discouraging. And so there was a lot of turnover, but it was an investment. Those that did stick it through and started to, that's a lovely thing. You start having strategies. There were people who never figured it out. They just didn't. Others figured out that if I'm walking and I'm not planting, I'm not getting paid. So you made sure that you were planting trees every 2 meters while you walk towards the back of your plot. And you made sure that before you ran out of trees, you budgeted that you would have enough trees to walk back out to the edge of the road to bag up again. That's strategy. And that's the difference with people just aimlessly kind of plopping trees in the ground and not making it work. So those lessons were really valuable. It is hard. I think that everything worthwhile is worth an effort. That I don't think anything worthwhile comes easy. I really don't. And so the reward comes in actually being successful through it and not quitting.
Let's go back to your education. You mentioned Queen's University, that you started off there.
Mm-hmm.
You were on the varsity volleyball team, but what were you studying at the time?
Well, I started just as in general arts. I could jokingly say I did a gap year, but it wasn't really a gap year. I took a very wide range of subject matter in my first year because I didn't know what I wanted to do, and it was fascinating. There were some courses that I liked. There were some courses I did not like. I think that's pretty common. I specialized in playing volleyball, and I also did like the social side of university and residence and the parties and having fun. What I did discover that pivotal day with my neighbor in residence, I then pursued. I went into fine arts the second year at Queen's, and I started doing studio painting and drawing and sculpture, and discovered quickly that I loved it. But I also discovered through the help of one of my instructors that the university path at that time was not the right one for me. I needed to go to an art school where it would be more like an apprentice type program, where the instructors and the students were more collaborative, where there was hands-on, there was more making. And at the time, when I was at Queen's, there were some exceptional people in the fine art program, but a lot of the focus was on academic because the focus was very much on delivering a degree. And so a lot of work was on the academic side, a lot of talking about the intentions around art history, and less about making. And so I made a very, very hard decision at that point in time to leave what had become the closest group of friends I'd ever had. I lived with a group of amazing guys that were in different programs at Queen's, and we had an amazing house. And I had created this level of friendship that I'd never had before. And I chose to leave it. And I moved to Vancouver, and I went to art school on the other side of the country, knowing nobody in Vancouver. And it was one of those fork in the road moments. And I made the really hard decision to pursue it, and no regrets. It was transformative. But that's what led me out west.
Was there any sort of culture shock moving out to Vancouver? Because not that Kingston is a big city or a small city, it's kind of in between, even though it's our former nation's capital. I mean, growing up just outside of Nipissing, this is your first time in a major metropolitan area.
Yeah, I definitely, you know what, it's ironic that I lived in Toronto now for so many years, because I was so scared of Toronto growing up. Any other city was not frightening to me. It was more like the barriers were down to explore. I found Vancouver to be a very friendly place to live for someone who's outdoorsy and who likes to be in the outdoors. I biked everywhere, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. It was fantastic. It's not a huge. It's a big city in Canada, but it's actually it's not a big scary metropolitan. So it was a really great place to live, and I really enjoyed it.
So take us through what life was like at Emily Carr University compared to, you've already mentioned comparatively to what it was like at Queens, where it was a little bit more theoretical, but just give me an idea of what your day was like there compared to, say, a day at Queens.
Well, I had two things that were different for me. Having had done a couple of years of university, I did go back and I started over at art school, and I think it's called foundation. The foundation year at art school is always really fascinating, and the life lessons are amazing because you're pushed to limits that I don't think any other program at university would ever push you through. And an example there is we did a project where we had 2 weeks to work on an art piece, and you worked on it. Everyone poured their heart and souls into their piece, and then you brought your pieces in, and they were immediately the next phase in the project, unbeknownst to everyone in the group, was that your piece was going to be handed over to somebody else who was going to work on it for 2 weeks. And it was shocking to hand your work over that you were so defensive about and so precious about, and you had to let it go. And that person, the next person, had to, they were free to do whatever they wanted with it, whether it was destroy it, whether it was revamp it, whether it was take it a completely different direction. And those kinds of lessons of letting go of preciousness, of thinking about what encapsulated the experience and how to move forward on it was spectacular. So art school was really about those kinds of experiences, really pushing beyond the outcome and thinking more about the process and about the intention. So I still, even to this day, I meet with parents who have a child who's considering going to art school, and most families have a bit of concern about, well, what's their path going to be, because it is very hard to make it as a pure artist in this country. But creativity is so important. As a business leader, I have tapped into my creativity again and again with regards to solving problems and driving to solutions. And I can ladder a lot of it back to my years in foundation at art school, really thinking through things in a different way, coming at it from the side of exploring a different alternative.
I'm curious, were you ever on the other side of that exercise where someone handed you their work?
Oh yeah, no, that was part of it. Yes.
Oh, okay. So it was reciprocal then.
Yeah.
It wasn't like you just handed it to a senior
again, another
student.
lesson. You've been handed something. Yeah, I'm living it right now. I've been handed as I've stepped into this role at TPX. I'm not the founder. I work with one of the founders, and the other founder has retired. I work with a board who would really like the company to succeed, but I've been handed somebody else's work, and my job is to take it and to try to honor the original vision and intention, and try to change it into something that's going to really resonate and work by putting my own flavor and my own fingerprints on it. It was exactly the same as I was handed somebody's work. I needed to honor what they had started, but my vision was going to be a little different than theirs, and I had to have faith that together we would come up with something better. And the folks that actually understood that in the process, in the class, they succeeded. Those who couldn't either embrace that they were starting with somebody else's foundation, or couldn't let go of their own creation, they ultimately failed. And so I see that lesson right now so alive in trying to take a company and move it to the next phase and help it grow and help it become something better than what it was originally conceived at, while honoring and respecting where it came from.
We're going to take a quick break. Enjoying this episode? Of course you are, or you wouldn't have made it this far. Complement your listening experience by subscribing to the Media People newsletter at mediapeople.ca/newsletter or at mediapeople.beehive.com. It's a mix of original and curated content designed to feed your curiosity while aiding in personal development. On top of more podcasts, we'll connect you with articles, interviews, and industry events. Subscribe at mediapeople.ca/newsletter or mediapeople.beehive.com. After graduation, you pursued art professionally. And we know being an artist is kind of like being an athlete. It's really either feast or famine. So how did that go for you?
Yeah, my joke of my often I like to say that my autobiography would be the success of a failed artist. I did my best. I actually, in broad terms, I was successful. I showed my work in various galleries. I was able to get a Canada Council art grant and an Ontario Arts Council grant. I had a studio here in Toronto. I would show my work every 15 months or so, and I would sell a bunch of work. And it's amazing that I once in a while, someone will take a picture of their living room and send me an update of how a painting it looks in their house. And it's amazing. And yet, as successful as I was, I never even made it to the poverty line. So it's a tough road. It covered its own costs, but it certainly wouldn't pay for my own future and any desires of that I had to have a house or a family. And so most artists, there are some that some come out of school and are very fortunate. They are able to have a path that they're able to work with a collector or a gallery, and they're able to get their work in great collections, and they come up with a sustainable business model for them to continue pursuing art as a professional. The most people that continue making art and trying to thrive, they teach or they have some other side gig. And I was no exception. And at one point I decided to, back to the Tom Thompson, the group of 7 folks who were commercial artists, and that's what supported their ability to create their passion of their own art. I went back to school and thought, I'm going to be a designer. I'm going to use my creativity, and I will get paid for it, and I will figure out a path that way. And that's what led me to stepping into Centennial's postgraduate program, which back in the day was called the New Media Design or New Media. I can't even remember what it was called. And it was in the burgeoning days. It was right at the end of the 90s, and interactive was really starting to blossom. CD-ROMs and websites and multimedia. It was a fascinating time to be part of.
And so at Centennial College, after graduation, this led into, I guess we could say, the start of your media career, and you landed at the CBC. But you had to really wrestle your way in there, right? It wasn't as automatic where you apply and got the internship, if I've got it correct.
You are absolutely correct. I part of the program, there was 120 hours of internship that was required, and you were on your own to figure out where would you serve your paid time or unpaid time. Some people got paid. Most of us did not get paid. And I was really fascinated with some of the stuff that was coming out of the CBC. At the time, there was a group called Arts Canada, and there was a group called Radio 3, and they were doing some incredible creative digital work. And it was in support of radio, and it was really ahead of its time. And I found out somebody who worked there, and I found out who their boss was, and I found out who their boss's boss was. And I started asking about the opportunity to come in as an unpaid intern. And I was given the hand. Nope, we don't have a program. No, we can't come in. And I just kept going, and I kept at it until finally the person who was heading up the whole program at the CBC, he turned to his person and said, "Just bring this guy in. He's just annoying me." And so that was where I started. I started I was under the wing of an incredible guy named Tim Neeson at the Arts Canada Group. And I was brought in as an unpaid intern. And I like everything, like the farm, like tree planting, like I put my full passion into it. And it didn't take long to be I made myself valuable. And so when my unpaid hours came up, they had to make a decision. Do we say goodbye or do we pay this kid? And they chose to pay me. And I got a contract as an associate producer. And my first project was I had to go to Ottawa and I covered a poetry slam called Face Off. And I created it was an amazing opportunity to be part of a poetry slam and to build out a multimedia experience that went with that contest. And that was the beginning. After that, I had opportunities to work with the incredible Stuart McLean and the Vinyl Cafe. And then my biggest opportunity came when David Suzuki and his producers talked to me about doing some work with their program, as they were finding the constraints of 22 minutes of television to be extremely challenging. They would have hundreds of hours of recordings and more content information. And so we started doing work together on building out multimedia presentations around their themes. So that was where things really changed for me. I won some international awards for the work I did with the nature things, and it was life-changing. It was amazing.
So is it safe to say you were at the dawn of these digital extensions coming out of broadcast?
Yes, I mean, and it was at a time where internet went to a mighty 128. From the early dial-up to high speed was starting to happen. You still had to be extremely careful about how you designed things so that it would work. There was the notion of the platforms were starting to, or the digital platform on computers was really starting to take on a life of its own, and it became a medium. People were not just going to the internet to search something or to send an email on their America's or whatever, on their AIM, and it became an actual medium for communicating and for having experiences on. And that was a really interesting time, because it's still the broadcast companies. Jumping from the CBC, I moved over to Alliance Atlantis. And at the time, Alliance Atlantis, their digital group was under sales and marketing, because it was seen more like a billboard where people were using the internet to say, whoa, you're on the internet, go back to TV. There were some really smart people at Alliance Atlantis who started to, Michael McMillan took his bet on specialty television, on digital specialty television. And then the team looked at digital platforms as a way to actually engage audiences in ways that you couldn't do on television, that were additive instead of using it to just bounce you back to that one platform. And so it was a early and new and different. And so I was hired at Alliance Atlantis to begin to program content on digital platforms. While at that point in time, it was still just one digital platform. But not long from then, the iPhone would come out and the iPod, and then it was continuing to improve, and the iPad came out not long after that. And so a lot of work was starting to be done to say, hey, we can engage these audiences on these platforms, and we can also monetize. But it wasn't easy, because there was a lot of threats to traditional platforms at that time. And so I was often at that leading edge, let's call it, of new audiences and new thinking.
You mentioned that Alliance Atlantis had your role under sales and marketing. Was that a bit of a shift for you, though? Because when you were at CBC does have ad revenue, but looking at some of the properties you worked on, at CBC was CBC Kids, completely ad-free.
Yeah.
Vinyl
Yeah.
Cafe starts off on radio. Radio's completely ad-free. So was there a bit of an adjustment here, knowing that there was either directly or indirectly some sort of revenue target
Yeah,
against your
I
head?
would. Yeah, I mean, in terms of clarification, I would say that digital had been under sales and marketing, and I was brought in when it moved into content, and so
Okay.
there was one of my mentors, Claude Gallipeau, was hired to come in and to build out a P&L and to create we created a digital business division where there was going to be revenues and targets and measurables. And my role in that group was to create content and fix the product. And so I didn't shift into thinking about. I mean, fast forward from there many years later, I was definitely immersed into a sales organization. But at that time, my accountability was still to the end user, to the audience.
Alliance Atlantis was acquired by CanWest. You became the VP and General Manager of Digital Media. Before we talk about how your role changed, tell me about how the company changed when CanWest came in, how the culture shifted, anything like that.
Everyone who worked at Alliance Atlantis has an amazing experience, and there's a connection that continues to this day. There are still meetups for folks that work there. They'll get together for drinks at the Pilot on a annual basis, and there's something special from having lived in that era. CanWest buying us changed a lot. It was shocking. It was difficult to understand what would happen. And with everything, with change, I think the predominant feeling when you've been acquired is fear. Fear that what you've been doing will no longer be supported. Fear that you will be assimilated. Fear that when push comes to shove, everything that you've built up is actually going to be dismissed. And most of the times that's actually unfounded and it's not real, but those are the feelings that start to happen. This particular acquisition was extremely, well, let's call it bizarre, in that it was a broadcast company acquiring another broadcast company. And so it took a year for the CRTC to make a decision on whether it would be allowed to move forward. And so there were people that were in trust, it was called. So they were not allowed to talk to each other. The people in Alliance Atlantis Broadcasting, regulated by the CRTC, were not allowed to talk to folks in CanWest, in Global, and in the organization there. And then there were folks who were out of trust, and I happened to be out of trust. And so I was chosen as on a small integration working team, and I had it was an incredible opportunity. I worked with Monitor Consulting, and we were part of let's call it a tiger team, who explored how to best integrate the two companies where 1 + 1 would equal 3. Figuring out where culturally things would overlap, where we could improve. And there was a ton of work on bringing the two cultures together. And so when the dust settled a year later, that was where I emerged and took the role of heading up the broadcast digital team. And I worked closely with the print side people, and the culture was definitely different than it had been as a small little specialty television company. But the Aspers really pushed to say what they wanted with Alliance Atlantis was they wanted to actually immerse the entire culture with some of the best of what we had, while at the same time leveraging what they had done really well. And so ultimately, it really was a bit more of the peanut butter cup, where one was peanut butter and one was chocolate. And it was really fascinating to be part of.
Did you find that, because I see some parallels here, did you find that the exercise we spoke about earlier when you started at Emily Carr University, where it's like you take someone's art, pass it on to someone else, and they have to finish it, did you find that, just in hindsight, that you were doing that same exercise just in the business world?
Yeah, I guess when one looks back at their life, the various decisions you make weave a story, and you can see the road behind you. It's really hard to see it in front of you. I have continually been in a place where my role is to collaborate and to make something that has started better. And so I have often been one of my previous bosses, Keith Pely at Rogers Media, he said, Pary, you live at the tip of the spear. My job is to be at the tip of the spear, to help people see opportunities and to reduce the fear of change, so that they can actually see the bigger picture. So looking back, yes, I don't know where it came from or where it started, but I do have I have a collaborative spirit that can take things and I can work with them. Absolutely. So whether it's turning around a company, whether it's transforming a division inside a company, whether it's creating completely new opportunities to leverage an audience with a brand and extend it into something else, that's been something that I can look back at, and there is consistent repetition of that. Absolutely.
Let's talk about your time at Rogers Media, because you started first as the VP of Product Digital Media, then you were VP General Manager of Digital Media, and then this last position must have been wonderful for you. VP GM Digital, Rogers Media, Sportsnet, and NHL, because that must have really indulged that competitive side of you and your passion for sports.
That was a long title for sure. Rogers was going through media's had to transform so much in the last 20 years. The business has become more challenging, and so the margins have come down, and the leaders of media have had to be more disciplined and have had to figure out ways of trying to deliver a better bottom line while the top line has been changing. So when I first started at Rogers, it had been extremely decentralized. Each group under broadcasting, radio, TV, magazines, Sportsnet, the shopping channel, and the Rogers Center, the sports and Blue Jays, they all had their own digital teams. They all had their own sales teams. They all had their own marketing teams. They had their own communications teams, their own finance teams, their own HR teams. They were like separate entities. And there was a move to look and centralize a number of these things that could be leveraged and share the expertise across the enterprise if possible. And it really was the birthplace of Rogers Media at the time, which before that it had just been a consolidation of these separate businesses. So digital was one of the things that was looked at, and they called it a center of excellence. And there were attempts to try to grow it as a freestanding business. So in the GM days, I had a P&L and needed to drive incremental revenue that would need to stand alone. And we were doing acquisitions and partnerships, and we launched iVillage, and SweetSpot.ca was acquired, and Branchez-vous Media in Montreal was acquired, and there were a whole number of activities that were going on to stand up a digital business. And that fixed some things and it broke some things. And as always happens, there are regime changes. When one CEO stepped down and another stepped in, they had a different approach. And so my ebb and flow of titles of areas of accountability and responsibility at Rogers changed with the leadership. And so I was flexible and would pivot with the changes in the wind, and sometimes things were centralized. At one point in time at Rogers, I had 350 people under me in a division.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
That's anxious.
And at another time, I had a tiny group of, and so it depended, but I had influence. I worked, so, the example there would be at one point, all the developers and the people building things were under me. And then the shift happened and those people moved into IT, or the same thing, content. All of the producers that were producing content, writers and editors who did digital, were under me. And at a different point, they moved into the content teams. And so I always found you just sort of needed to be flexible, and you needed to to go where things were going. And I am not territorial. I was very focused on the objectives and the outcomes down the line, and not territorial. So I worked really well with the various people and offered support when it was needed, and built incredible collaborations. One of my I would say one of my biggest achievements, and if he listens to this podcast, I'm sure he'll have a good laugh. But Scott Moore and I, when we first started together, Scott was the president of Sportsnet, and Scott was very used to having full control over everything, over all aspects of a brand that he oversaw. And he and I were peers on the leadership team, and we had to figure out a way to work collaboratively to move Sportsnet and NHL into the next level. And it was, at the beginning, it was there were definitely challenges with changing the way that Scott would perceive me, and turning that into a completely different working relationship, and converting me from a threat or a challenge to his authority to a partner. And in the years we worked together, we blossomed a friendship, and we fought about things and decisions in the way good decision makers need to do. We weren't always aligned, but we had the opportunity and the trust to push each other. And in the end, the two of us together made some incredible strides forward for a brand. And we changed the way sports was being done in Canada on digital platforms. And we did it together.
You've had a series of promotions, specifically at Rogers, more than any other company you've worked for. If anyone listening to this is trying to go to the next level or go for a promotion within their own company, what advice would you give them?
That's a hard question. I think that always be aware of the opportunities around you. I think that the people that get overly concerned about the box they sit in, and only focused at their feet, don't see the world around them. And so a lot of times there are a lot of opportunities that might require you to look differently and take a step in a different direction. I think that's one. The second is, if you keep waiting for things, they generally don't happen. And so my advice to anyone who is looking for forward advancement, or for that next, I want to go from a director to a vice president, my advice to them is constant. If you're a director and you want to be a vice president, start watching the vice presidents around you and see how they behave, and see what their composure is like, and how they behave, and how they speak, and when they speak, and start emulating that. Start becoming that vice president before you've achieved the title of vice president. You need to take on that role. You need to start picking out the best of what you see around you, and you need to start to learn from that. So I think when that starts to happen, it is amazing that often recognition will start to follow. You start actually delivering more. Your behaviors and your deliverables start actually becoming more in line with the goals that you want to achieve. So when you set that target and you start acting in that role, things start to happen for you. They really do.
The future of Sport Lab. This must have been probably one of the most exciting endeavors that you've ever undertaken, simply because it seems to mesh a lot of your passions and your professional experience, namely tech and sports. So give us a brief as to what the future of Sport Lab is and what your role there entailed.
The future of Sport Lab, it started long before it was called the Future of Sport Lab. It actually was, I mentioned Scott Moore earlier, Keith Pely, Scott Moore, and Dale Hooper. And I started doing work with the DMZ, which was Ryerson at the time. It's still called the DMZ at Metropolitan University. It's an amazing group that incubates and accelerates some amazing ideas. And we started supporting some of the entrepreneurs that were pursuing sports specific, and I extended beyond sports with the nature of my work. And we started going in and we started becoming mentors and advisors to the startups. There was a person involved at the time, Sherry Bradish, who it was her goal to take it and specifically start leading in the sports industry before anyone else had actually done it. And her vision, with the support of Brian Cooper as the chair, they stood up this Future Sport Lab in partnership with MLSE at the time. And I was so lucky to be involved as a advisor and a mentor. And at one point, I actually was even working for the organization, doing some paid facilitation and helping them with their pitch sessions. And they just did their most recent cohort. Pitch day was about maybe 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, and it's still thriving and alive and generating incredible businesses, and seeing the success of these startups in this world. Yes, it's incredibly satisfying, and not all of them thrive and not all of them make it, but some of them have done really well. A couple in particular that I'm very fond of, and I'll pick one. It's called The Gist, and The Gist it has women founders, and it's women in sport, and it's a media company that's really tailored around female sports and female perspectives of all sport, and it's not just about women's sports, it's about all sports. And the women that started this company had great vision, and I have loved watching them continue to grow and thrive. It's been amazing.
What brought you to TorStar, and what did your role as SVP of Commercial Products and Sales Operations entail?
TorStar was an unexpected turn. I really thought that when I left Rogers, I thought that I was going to probably lean more into the tech and startup space. And I thought I was going to, I was interviewing at a lot of VP product roles and a lot of startups and a lot of pure digital companies. And it was a coffee with John Boynton, who I had known at Rogers. He had been the chief marketing officer of Rogers. He took on the CEO role, and he asked me to come in and have a coffee with him one evening in his office, and we had an unexpected conversation about what he was trying to do with transformation and what his transformation plan with the board was. He's one of the smartest people I've ever worked with, and he had the plan broken down in various streams, and one of the streams, stream number 7, was sales. And he explained to me that he had been seeing really good progress on all the other streams. In fact, some of the streams were already done and put to bed, but this stream number 7 was not progressing in the way that he wanted it to be in order to pull off the transformation. And he said to me, "I'd like you to come in and I'd like you to help me light a fire under sales transformation." And I said, "John, I've never been in charge of sales transformation. I've never run a sales team. I've never run a sales operations team. This is all would be completely new to me." And he smiled and he said, "Pary, if I was hiring you for what you've done before, you're right. I wouldn't be looking at you, but I know what you're capable of. And so I would like to hire you because I know what you're capable of, and I know that you would actually accelerate things." And so he took a chance on me, and I stepped into his leadership team, and we worked incredibly hard to rethink how sales could work at a extremely complicated company that had over 128 years of history and various pockets of people that had worked there a very long time and were justifiably trying to fight for their territories. And over the course of a couple of years, we really made some massive differences in changing a company, their whole philosophy from being transactional to being solutions oriented. And that work continues to this day. Brandon's running the revenue team there and is driving things so differently than what had been before John and I had arrived at the company. And it was an incredible experience. My one objective when he hired me that I was really looking for in my next role, I mentioned it earlier, but a growth mindset is something that's really, really important to me. And so I needed an opportunity to learn. And my goodness, did I ever learn. I was immersed in a completely different role. And it was a fire hose for 2 years. It was incredible. Not easy, but I learned a ton.
When sales came up in that interview and you put your hand up and said, maybe I'm the wrong person for this job. You didn't say it like that, but you definitely flagged some personal concerns. Did you think the interview was over at that point? Like, what made you say that and be honest and transparent about your capabilities versus some of the LinkedIn wisdom that gets thrown around as say yes and fake it till you make it?
My integrity is my North Star. So it's always I always have to follow I'm incredibly honest and candid. And the end result might have been that he says, well, absolutely, I'm not going to look at you. But there are times where it delivers and we start out with an honest foothold. I guess it's, back to the farm, was pounded into me around honesty, around integrity, around being accountable. That's just the way I am. So I don't know that there would have been another option. It is a interesting dance. I have been there with regards to looking for work, and the whole interviewing process is. A friend of mine coined it. I don't know if they coined it or if they had heard it somewhere, but it's often a dance between two liars. Where, yeah, it's true. Candidates putting their best foot forward, and they're trying their best to show their strengths, and in organizations doing the same thing. They're talking about everything that's amazing about them, and once you start then you start seeing the realities, and it's just the way it's set up. I'm not saying that they're malicious lies, but you're putting your best foot forward. If you approach it with integrity and honesty, you'll avoid the surprises. So it's worked for me.
And you definitely got to step up at TorStar because you then moved into the president and CEO role at iReturn, which is part of TorStar. So how did that come about? How did that transition come about?
There was back to change. We talked about it with CanWest acquiring Alliance Atlantis. There was a big change that happened about 2 years into my time at TorStar, and it was when Paul Rivette and Jordan Bitove stepped in to buy TorStar, and again, a massive fluctuation of change, and what's this going to mean, and how is it going to work, and who's going to do what, and they stepped in to bring a fresh perspective of leadership into where they were going to take the business. And they did the same thing with I wasn't special. They met with every ELT member, the executive leadership team member, and they did a one-on-one. And it was in the middle of COVID, and it was weird. You went into the office and sat socially distanced in a boardroom, and I did a one-on-one with the two of them. And kind of like the Vancouver move, I had an opportunity to toe the line and say, everything's great, I'm happy, and not stick my neck out and not take a chance. I took, spoiler alert, there's a pattern in me. I took the opportunity to share that I had learned a ton at the work I was doing, but I didn't think that the work I was doing was my destiny. I didn't think that the role I was providing for TorStar was maximizing the value that I could provide. And that I felt the desire to be more entrepreneurial, to be more nimble, to be part of something more digital. And their response, they could have taken that and began my pink slip and said, okay, let's get rid of this guy. But instead it fired up their imagination. It was Jordan. Jordan turned to me and said, Pary, you're more of a natural scoring forward, and you got hired in defense. And in fact, for the last few months, you've been having to put the goalie gear on. We'd like to get you back up into forward and scoring some goals. And we actually are going to keep our eyes open for an entrepreneur role for you. And it was a month later. iReturn was going through a transaction with Loblaws, and the deal didn't go down the way that it was originally planned to go down, and there was a challenge they had made an agreement with Loblaws to sell off a bunch of the technology and the engineering staff and a bunch of people to support it for Loblaws. But then they still had a team of 17 or 18 people and a bunch of clients to support, and they were stuck. And so they reached out to me and said, we've got this unique problem. Would you be interested? And of course, my answer was yes. So I stepped in to help on the initial phases as an interim general manager to help with the transition and to figure out a plan. And that was in November. And by, honestly, middle of January, I was falling in love with iReturn, falling in love with the problems we were trying to solve, with the intensity of trying to come up with solutions in the team. I was convinced that there was a path forward, and they then turned to me and said, "You really feel that way?" And I said, "Yes." And they said, "Okay, well, you're jumping in. It's now your full-time job, and not only that, you're going to be a part owner." And so I took on an equity position and took on the CEO and president role. And it was, I often describe this part of my journey. Becoming a CEO, it's going to sound really corny, Victor, but I realized I'd been living as my leadership journey. I'd been a happy caterpillar for years, and I'd been happily thriving and existing as a healthy caterpillar. Becoming a CEO was, for me, the emergence and becoming out of the cocoon and becoming a butterfly. It showed me who I was destined to be. I am a leader. I love making decisions. I love leading culture. I love solving complex problems. And so that was it was an opportunity for me of a lifetime. And so I will be eternally grateful for that.
Even though you had, 350 people reporting into you at Rogers, you still consider yourself a caterpillar back then?
Yes, absolutely. And I would say my progression, moving from there to the having now had more experience as a CEO, I think one of the things when you own a business or you're taking on the leadership as an owner or as an entrepreneur, you need to contemplate things that most leaders in most businesses never really have to think about. The cash flow is a problem that a CEO of a small business has, that you have to be immersed in. You have to be thinking about your balance of accounts receivable and payable. You have to be thinking about are we going to make payroll? What does our projections look like? You have to be in the numbers, absolutely immersed in them. When you are managing my budget at Rogers was humongous, but it was a budget, and I was managing a P&L. And I never really had to think about, well, where's the money coming from? Because it was a budget. And so I was very focused on trying to deliver on my targets and deliver on my budget components. But intrinsically, you're never going to feel it until you take the net out. And if you don't do this right, then the business fails. So it's a completely different mindset.
Let's bring everything full circle. How did the CEO position of the Podcast Exchange present itself? Because one thing I've noticed on job boards, not a lot of VP, SVP, or CEO roles get posted.
Yeah, the job search topic and looking for senior leadership roles is, I think you could do a whole podcast on this one, to be honest with you. It is a extremely challenging process. It's humiliating. It can be devastating. It just takes sorry to swear, but it just kicks the shit out of you. And it is hard. It is really, really hard. You spend a lot of time networking. You spend a lot of time trying to connect dots and trying to listen. But a lot of senior roles do not get posted. It's for a variety of reasons. It could be a confidential search. It could be because the board is making a different change and the person in the seat doesn't know. There's all kinds of reasons and rationales behind it. Often it's using a recruiter. Sometimes it's not using a recruiter. It depends. Many of the VC companies have their own intake programs and have their own way of lining up the prospective leaders. It is not easy. So I'll start with that. So anyone out there who's listening to this, who's looking for a senior role, don't be discouraged. It is discouraging. You will feel down. You will feel the incredible burden. You'll feel the stress about not knowing where you're going, but just keep believing in yourself. Keep putting your best foot forward. Keep managing your own situations. So that's advice number one. Advice number two, and this is where it leads into my answer of your question, understanding the needs of organizations and tailoring your interviews and your conversations based around their specific problems that you're trying to solve. Even within a role, a board will have a different set of objectives and problems they're trying to solve than a CEO. If you're trying for a C-level position, if you're trying for a VP position, the hiring manager is going to have a very different a set of circumstances of how they're looking for you to be helping versus a board or versus the broader team. And so really understanding the markup and what they're trying to achieve makes a big difference. So on this one, the networking aspect of it, I was being, back to my honesty, I was clearly communicating. If you could go back in time and look at my LinkedIn posts, but I was being honest about how challenging it was, how discouraging it was, how I felt that I had a lot that I could offer from a leadership perspective, from passion and experience. And it opened up a conversation with one of the board members to say, hey, would you ever be interested in exploring a role for a company, a small company, which on the surface, you would look at my experience and you might say, well, I've worked at big enterprise businesses or with big enterprise support, and you might dismiss me as a potential candidate. And so my approach on this was very different with this particular conversation, and I was open to it. And it began with a conversation with this person, which then led to a follow-up with the board chair, which led to a couple of quick conversations. And you're right, the position was not posted. They were doing their own quiet search, and they were exploring candidates. And candidly, I was not on the original list because it looked like it wouldn't be a big enough company or opportunity for me. And in the end, it's exactly what I need right now. I'm running a complex small company is providing me with so much learning and so much of my own personal growth. It's incredibly rewarding. And I've fallen in love with the industry, the podcasting industry, and the team. And so ultimately it all began by trying to change a mindset of how I would have been perceived in market to open a conversation.
What have you learned being the CEO of the Podcast Exchange that you didn't learn or you wouldn't have learned in your previous roles at larger organizations?
I feel like the biggest lesson that I've really learned here is that small doesn't mean simple. That a small company, we're 6 employees. This role is far more complex than when I had 350 people under me. The complexity is not in line with the scale or scope of the job. It is incredibly complex. feel that I've learned lessons around business management that I have never had to lean into as much. When you are small, you can't rely on other people. I shouldn't say that. I rely on other people. I can't delegate to other people because they're at full capacity. So, it's a small thing, but like I'm the super admin of our benefits plan. I've never had to do that. I've never had to lean in and figure out what's our benefits coverage, how does it work, how do you add an employee. It's fascinating, but in terms of it's given me exposure right down back to that scratching with the chickens. I put my accounts receivable hat on a daily basis, and I reach out to coordinators at some of the big holding companies who are behind on their payments to connect the dots and say, we really need you to pay, and this is why. It's an experience of not being precious, of doing what needs to be done, and I think that's been a really valuable exposure to me. It's really been really eye-opening, and I'm very grateful for it.
What's the last podcast you listened to?
The last podcast I listened to, I just listened to the Ted Danson and Woody Harrelson, their first episode of their Everyone Knows Your Name with Will Arnett. It's their pilot. So in terms of rapid shot, that I just listened to that one recently, and enjoyed it. But that's the one I recently listened to.
Pary, this has been a fantastic chat. Are you ready for rapid fire questions?
I'm going to try.
The campaign you're most proud of?
It's a terrific question, but if someone asked me to pick my favorite child, I definitely couldn't do that, and I wouldn't do that. I've been part of so many great campaigns over the years, and been involved in the content creation to the inception to the concept. I cannot choose just one. I think that I've been part of so many great campaigns, so I know it feels like I'm sidestepping it, but I'm really not.
Your favorite movie?
This one, I mean, in terms of, there are so many amazing movies out there that move the needle on great cinema and whatnot. But immediately when you ask that question to me, I think about the movie that I've seen probably over 100 times because I've had to watch it, but I'm at a place where we can keep watching it. It's Kung Fu Panda. It sounds so silly, but I know my boys, 13 and 16, they still watch it on a regular basis. They know every line in it. And I'm often pulling wisdom out of that movie in my everyday life. There's a line that the crazy turtle Oogway says to Master Shifu, the Dustin Hoffman character. He says, "One often meets their destiny on the road they take to avoid it." And I pull that one out of the air so often. It's amazing, but it's Kung Fu Panda.
If Hollywood were to make a movie based on your life story, who would you want to play you?
Well, the funny thing is I just listened to the Woody Harrelson and Ted Danson episode. I have often been told that Woody Harrelson is my Hollywood whatever mini doppelganger. It's not exactly, I don't have his Southern drawl, but there is something to do with our gap tooth smile and our constant, where we always seem to be trying to make other people feel comfortable. Woody Harrelson and his, let's just say his hairstyle is also very similar to mine. So we have that in common. So I think Woody Harrelson would be the person who should play me.
My follow-up, if Hollywood were to make that movie based on your life story, what would you call it?
I don't have an answer for that one. I thought about this one. I'm not gifted enough to come up with a catchy title.
Your favorite book?
My favorite book is Le Petit Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. I love the absurdity of the book and the vision of how grown-ups think and act. And although I'm an old fart, I still love looking at the eyes through the innocence of a child. And I am constantly trying to tap into my inner child. And so I love to be silly. I love to look at things in a silly way. And I don't take life too seriously. And so I absolutely adore that book.
Your favorite song?
This one's a tough one. I mean, I jump. There's no doubt my favorite band is Radiohead. I'm a Radiohead fan and have been for many, many years. But I was not able to think of a song that I would isolate as my favorite song. The favorite song that I have that stands above is by a Canadian artist. His name's Hayden. And the song is called Dynamite Walls. And it evokes the visualization of a Canadian road trip, of driving on a highway with the walls that of the Canadian Shield, or out west, the dynamited walls, and driving through the snow and scratching a hole through the frost of the windshield and trying not to hit any deer or anything on the road. It just completely takes me home. It absolutely is my anthem.
The best advice you have ever received?
The best advice I've ever received was from my amazing sister. And we talked earlier about the job hunt process and the ups and downs that it ensues. And she very wisely to me one day, when I was feeling the effects of the challenge, she said, "Pary, learn to differentiate between the things that are in your control and the things that are not, and let go of the ones that are not." And that completely shifted the way that I approached things. And it's been, I wrote it out. I've got it. I've written it down on my wall here in my office, and I'm constantly reminded to let go of things I cannot control. And so, incredibly wise. My sister's amazing, and she's way smarter and wiser than me. And so every time I can learn from her, it's a blessing.
My signature closing question: if you weren't in media, what would you be doing and why?
I'll go back to my earlier statement around the metamorphosis I went through in becoming a CEO. I think my greatest gift I have to the world is to lead. I have a lot of experience in media, but I think no matter what the industry is, I would be helping an organization to find its path to success.
Pary, this has been a fantastic chat. Thank you so much for your time.
What a pleasure. Great catching up with you, and really appreciate the opportunity. Thanks, Victor.